In Milton's Paradise Lost, Satan says, the mind, in its own place and in itself, can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. When Satan says this, he does not realize its truth or the ironic fact that his hate-filled mind has indeed made for him a hell of heaven, but cannot make a heaven of hell. And Satan, in this great work by Milton, has lots of company. Let's read that line again. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. No one knows or can even guess at the uncounted millions who are living in a virtual heaven of opportunity in every department of their lives, and yet turn it into a living hell. They have every opportunity to love, and yet they hate. They have every opportunity to trust, and yet they mistrust. Every opportunity to work and give of themselves, yet they hold back in the suspicious dread that they're being cheated. They have every opportunity to share in the wealth of the richest society since the beginning of the world, yet they sit and grumble because it's not given to them for being lazy and ignorant. They're ignorant even though they are surrounded on every side with a free and abundant opportunity to learn to their full capacity. The public libraries in their towns and cities are half empty, waiting in vain for them to enter and learn. The schools and their parents beg them to stay in schools, to qualify themselves for a fast-changing world, but they drop out. But it's not just to some of these that the mind turns a possible heaven into a hell. In every walk of life, in every strata of society, you can see the bitter, desolate expressions, the hollow eyes and listless hands of those whose minds have condemned them to the tortures of the damned, or a life of endless tedium and ennui. The old Roman Seneca put it this way. He said, a great, a good, and a right mind is a kind of divinity lodged in flesh, and may be the blessing of a slave as well as of a prince. It came from heaven, and to heaven it must return, and it's a kind of heavenly felicity which a pure and virtuous mind enjoys in some degree even on earth. And Chaucer said, my mind to me a kingdom is, such present joys therein I find, that it excels all other bliss that earth affords. Every person's mind is his kingdom, and he, as the reigning monarch, decides what kind of a kingdom it is to be, bleak or bountiful, rich or poor, interesting or dull, happy or unhappy. Milton knew what he was talking about when he had his Satan say in Paradise Lost, the mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. An interesting and happy mind can, as Seneca said, be the blessing of a slave as well as a prince, and the most important moment of our lives is when we understand that we can fashion our minds as we will. What stubbing, plowing, digging, and harrowing is to land, that thinking, reflecting, examining is to the mind. We know the soil is rich. The harvest is up to us. I ran across something in the National Observer I think you'll find interesting. It originally appeared in the Atlantic Monthly and was written by Paul Foley, an advertising executive. Of the, some 96 million American females alive today, from infants to octogenarians, 8 out of 10 at some time in their lives will have worked for a wage. In an average month last year, there were some 23 million women at work. Some 17 million of them are full-time workers. Now, though women are represented in almost every type of employment, from domestic help to the highly paid professions, most jobs that women hold full-time are in the lower-paid, unskilled, semi-skilled, or what might be called the blue smock categories. Since World War II, the number of women in American industry has increased, but the number of women in jobs or professions requiring higher education, training, or specialized knowledge has not kept pace. Why? Well, because too many young American women of college age shy away from the commitments which are necessary to make the most of themselves as individual human beings. They're exhibiting a growing tendency to avoid a career commitment with its earlier commitment to education and preparation in order to enter early into the marriage lottery. The professions are wide open to American women. They won this right long ago, yet only 3.5% of the American lawyers, for instance, are women. Elizabeth Blackwell, the first woman to graduate from an American medical college, became an MD in 1849. More than a century later, only 6% of all students in the medical colleges of this country are women, and the figures remained almost constant for more than 50 years. By contrast, of approximately 350,000 doctors in the Soviet Union, 76% are women. In many European countries, 30 to 35% of all practicing physicians are women. As far back as 1956 in the Soviet Union, 53% of all specialists, persons skilled by reasons of higher education in any field of endeavor, 53% were women. 1/3 of all deputies elected to regional Soviets or councils are women. The plain fact is that in the United States today we have an urgent need for more doctors, more dentists, more technicians, more scholars, more philosophers at all levels. We cannot afford the luxury of wasted human potential. So wrote Mr. Paul Foley. Well, this shows the tremendous opportunities that exist for women in this country today. There's a crying need for more women in the professions. You can be a doctor, a lawyer, or other professional and still get married and raise 10 or 15 children if you want to. A man doesn't give up marriage and a home when he opts for the professions, and a woman doesn't have to either. Anyway, it's something to think about, something to talk over with that young daughter of yours. How about it, little girl? Why don't you give some thought or talk to your school counselor about the possibilities of your becoming a doctor or other professional? We need more women in the professions. I've long held the belief, and perhaps you have too, that every business, no matter what its form or function, should have a purpose beyond that of survival. And this will also apply to the family. Now, naturally, the first responsibility of management, whether it's a small neighborhood restaurant, a corner gas station, or a corporate giant, is to survive and grow. It must earn a profit, not just to satisfy the owner, its stockholders, and board of directors, but so that it can pump needed money into research and development and expansion. It must earn a profit so that it can continue to pay the salaries of its employees and offer jobs to additional people as the company grows. Without survival, there's nothing. But it should also have an additional purpose, a deeper meaning constantly before it, and this should be to upgrade all who are influenced by it. Now, I'm sure there are many who will smile at this sentiment, but there are also many who will not. And the fact is that those who take this idea seriously are the most successful people in this or any other country. They also manage the world's most successful business firms in every segment of the business spectrum. For most businesses, this second purpose is ignored, even if it's known or understood, and this is precisely why the great majority of businesses of all kinds have to be classified as second-rate. They lack the deeper cause that must accompany greatness in anything. In fact, the not uncommon slump or leveling off which comes to so many businesses after a long period of growth is often brought about by the loss of this second cause. For example, a business which begins with a purpose of providing the best product it can in its field may, 10 or 15 years later, be more concerned with shaving costs or increasing profit margins or seeing how many of the widgets it can turn out and forgetting all about quality. Now, this business of shaving costs and increasing profit margins is important in business, but only if it's subordinate to the former, if the business is to really flourish. And many once successful business firms have gone under because they became so involved in markets and competition and price that they lost sight of the company's purpose, its reason for being. There's a saying that people remember quality and are proud of it long after they've forgotten price. And the most successful companies on earth are those that manage to give top quality at a very reasonable price. Our country proved to the world that it could be done. But every businessman must ask himself, or at least should ask himself, how is my customer somehow improved, upgraded, bettered because he uses my product or service? What is my contribution to society beyond that of earning a living? Just as a father and mother should ask themselves, what are we contributing to our children besides food, clothing, school, and shelter? It's this greater purpose that spells the difference between that which is average and that which is great, and none of us can ask the question of ourselves too often. Perhaps more people in business should keep in mind the advice David Ogilvy once gave to a group of advertising copywriters. He said, "The consumer is not a moron. She's your wife." In his book, Child of the Century, Ben Hecht observed, "A wise man knows that he has only one enemy, himself. This is an enemy difficult to ignore and full of cunning. It assails one with doubts and fear. It always seeks to loosen and lead one away from one's goal. It's an enemy never to be forgotten, but constantly outwitted." Something to think about, isn't it? And in my way of thinking, a truer statement has never been written. Each of us has only one enemy, himself. An enemy difficult to ignore and full of cunning. And no one knows this enemy better than the person who must manage his own time, as Ben Hecht, as a writer, had to do, or as does the commissioned salesman or the person trying to break a bad habit or lose weight. Mortimer Feinberg, an industrial psychologist writing for Nation's Business, says that One of the hardest things a man can do is to look at himself objectively, realistically, without self-glorification, deception, or despair. An analysis of yourself can pay rich dividends in a variety of ways. Increased effectiveness and impact on others, better personal relationships, greater personal fulfillment. As Bernard M. Baruch put it, only as you know yourself can your brain serve you as a sharp and efficient tool. Know your own failings and passions and prejudices so that you can separate them from what you see. Getting to know yourself is not simple. Psychologists agree that each of us builds up a strong network of defenses which act to protect us from others and, incidentally, from ourselves. All of us are born into this world helpless and dependent. In order to survive, we need to lean on others. The child growing up learns to turn to mother, not only for the comforts of physical help, but for the more rewarding comfort of approval. As we grow older, we continue the search for approval from the widening circle around us. We want friends not only to like us, but to approve of what we do, and in their approval we find reassurance of our own worth. So great is the human need for love and approval that we will even deceive ourselves, if necessary, rather than face the fact that we might not deserve it. Undisguised, our behavior might not always merit approval. All of us do things that are inconsiderate, unkind, downright cruel, but rather than face ourselves in an unkindly light, even to our own eyes, we unconsciously will protect our image of ourselves. We rationalize. We say, oh, well, I did it because, providing supposedly good and substantial reasons for our behavior. We project, disowning the fault and seeing it as the other fellow's problem. We displace by blaming someone else for our own faults that we can't accept. We compensate by stretching ourselves in one area when we failed in another. Our defenses serve two purposes. First, they represent an attempt to prove to others that we're really fine people and anything we do wrong is done for the right reason. And second, they help us to deceive ourselves. Know your enemy, and you can overcome him. Know yourself. The ancient advice still heads the list, and perhaps you can overcome the only real enemy you have, yourself. I had a call the other day from a young life insurance salesman. It was a long-distance call from another state. He told me he was thinking of leaving the life insurance business and going into something else, and he asked me my opinion of a good business for him. I asked him why he was leaving the life insurance business, and he said something to the effect that he just wasn't making any money. I tried to sell it, he said, but nobody wants to buy it. I suggested that maybe his problem is that he's motivated by an attempt to sell rather than by the attempt to help people solve their problems. You know, it's a well-known fact that the average family does not have enough life insurance. This is a problem. In trying to solve this problem, he would probably find himself quite successful selling life insurance. The success of our undertakings depends not so much on the undertakings themselves, but rather by our motive for doing them. It's our motive that makes the difference. One man says, there ought to be a lot of money in children's books. I'll write one. And then he's disappointed when it's rejected or flops on the market. But Hans Christian Andersen and the Grimm brothers and Lewis Carroll, Mark Twain, and Kipling were motivated to write their great children's stories out of their love for children. And these books and stories will last 1,000 years and earn millions. The greatest novel ever written, War and Peace, by Leo Tolstoy, the greatest companies, the greatest men and women in all walks of life, achieved their greatness out of a desire to solve a problem or fulfill a need, or to express something that had to be expressed. Now, this is not to say that these people and companies did not earn a lot of money for what they produced. They did. But the key to their success is to be found in the fact that they were motivated more, at least in the beginning, by what was needed or what they felt they had to do than by any thought of profit. This is the actual secret, the key to profits. The man going into the restaurant business, for example, who does so with a determination to serve the best food in town, has 1,000 times more chances of success than the man who goes into the business solely for the purpose of making money. It's a matter of motive, of emphasis. And you'll find this true in every walk of life, every line of business, every job of every type and description. The man who made up his mind to put out the best can of pork and beans in the world did exactly that. He and a lot of bean farmers got rich in the process, but getting rich wasn't his reason for going into business. There's not a single thing on earth wrong about making money. This is why kids mow lawns and why millions of people get up in the morning and go to work. But success and the money that often accompanies it are like happiness. They cannot be sought directly. They are effects. The cause must have a powerful motive behind it. What's your big motive? Both William Shakespeare and Cecil B. DeMille got rich. Separated as they were in time and talent, they were both motivated by the same thing, to produce the very best, to express the very best that was in them. A very good mind belongs to a gentleman named Gilbert Hyatt, Columbia University professor, book critic for Harper's Magazine, radio lecturer, and author. Mr. Hyatt wrote a book many years ago titled Man's Unconquerable Mind, and in one part of this book he wrote, "The human mind is capable of far more work than it has ever done. A normal man uses nearly all his muscles during his mature life, but leaves large areas, perhaps two-thirds of his brain, dormant. Not even the greatest creative thinker has ever complained that his intellect was too weak to serve him, that he found it a dull and clumsy tool, but rather that he was approaching death before he learned all its uses. Then why are there so many ignorant and stupid people in the world? Surely it's because some of them, as individuals, misuse their minds, while others live in societies that discourage thought. Individually, many people throughout the world are simply lazy. The bright, adventurous intelligence which they enjoyed in their youth is allowed to lie virtually unused for the rest of their 70 years, covered over with a sediment of routine, rusted by the constant drip of casual gossip, clogged by meaningless chatter from newspaper and, if you'll pardon the expression, radio and television, employed only on daily problems and the incessant re-examination of personal reminiscences. Often an active mind forces its way out of the cocoon and cries for work, and then its owner gives it false and fruitless work to do. Many a man who unconsciously loathes the boredom of his life will relieve it by thinking, but by thinking about the wrong subjects. He'll memorize the first, second, and third horses in all the major races for 40 years, or the batting averages of 2,000 leading players. Many a woman finds her greatest intellectual pleasure in collecting and arranging an immense volume of gossip and genealogy. Who married whom? Who is whose cousin? What are the weaknesses of each particular family? And so forth. And lastly, many an otherwise intelligent man or woman wastes his or her time and intellect by failing to train and use the mind properly, by assembling masses of utterly uncoordinated facts and unverified information, then building on them. Such people become local eccentrics, hollow earth fanatics, amateur metaphysicians. They're not fools, but they have minds and spoil them. David Seabury has written that we must understand that our minds are not us. Our minds are tools that we may pick up and use for whatever task we choose, and just as you wouldn't use a fine steel carving knife to hack at heavy bones, you shouldn't waste the time and blunt the cutting edge of your mind on dulling subjects. Perhaps heredity might put an upper limit on a child's intellectual capacity, but this ceiling is so high that many scientists believe no human has yet even approached it. So here we are with two-thirds or more of our minds going to waste. If we can find more and better ways of using them, we can greatly increase the excitement, the fun, the rewards of living. Strange, unfathomable happiness. The happiness of thinking, of seeking knowledge for its own sake. Everyone's tasted it. It's born in children. It goes to school with them. What happens to it? Here's something else by Gilbert Hyatt. He wrote, thinking, learning, remembering, knowing, imagining, and creating new ideas, preserving and communicating knowledge over distances in time and space. Not only is it wonderful in its compass and variety, it is unique. It makes us human. Consider our lives. All other activities we share with the other inhabitants of the planet. Animals, birds, reptiles, fish, and insects also struggle for power as we do. They organize themselves into social groups. Many build. Some control their environment by ingenious inventions. Some of them, like some of us, collect wealth. They fight. They make love. They play games. Some have powers we shall never possess and can scarcely comprehend. Cunning and skillful they are. Yet collectively they learn little that's new, and individually almost nothing. Their skills are intricate but limited. Their art, though charming, is purely decorative. Their languages consist of a few dozen signs and sounds. Their memory is vivid but restricted. Their curiosity is shallow and temporary, merely the rudiment of that wonder which fills the mind of a human scientist or poet or historian or philosopher. They cannot conceive of learning and knowledge as a limitless activity administered by the power of will. Only human beings really learn and know and remember and think creatively as individuals. Knowledge acquired and extended for its own sake is the specific quality that makes us human. Our species has the hair and lungs of animals, reptilian bones, and fish-like blood. We are close indeed to the beasts. Often we're more cruel. But we're fundamentally different from them in that we can learn almost infinitely and know and recollect. We are Homo sapiens, man the thinker. The life of every individual man and woman is made up of many acts and passions, but it is most clearly and consistently seen as a pattern of learning. We think all the time. Our thoughts and our experiences continually form a mass of material which we accept and try to organize. It is chiefly in the depth and completeness of its organization that we differ from one another. History is the record of struggles for power, is exciting but unrewarding. Dinosaurs tore at one another for ages. Some survived for a while, some died. It's all meaningless. Tribes of human beings have been hunting and rending and enslaving one another for many centuries. It is factual, but is it important? No. Surely our essential history is the story of our learning and thinking. It was by learning that we ceased to be animals and made ourselves into men and women. That was the first stage. Cell by cell and reflex by reflex, the wonderful human brain was formed, and with it our two other human powers, the devices by which, even if the world fell into ruins, we could still rebuild it. Our fantastically intricate speech and our ingenious, adaptable hands. So wrote Gilbert Hyatt, and in reflecting on all of this, it makes you want to ask, but what am I doing with these wondrous gifts? It's said that if you give too much to a child, he will come to take his gifts for granted, as little more than is due. You and I have been given gifts beyond measure or price, and our reaction is usually the same. Someone sent me a very interesting little article about the words we use most. What do you think is the most frequently used word? Well, that's it. It's is. The personal pronoun I is more popular than you. Man outranks woman, but mother has a considerable edge over father. Scholars from the University of Chicago and the University of North Carolina have compiled a list of the 8,000 most frequently used words in the language, and they made this discovery. Regardless of education, most people use only 403 words in more than 80% of their everyday conversation. Now, whether you're a PhD, a ditch digger, a waitress, an office clerk, or a botanist, your basic talking vocabulary is about the same, the research team concluded, and you use only 403 words in more than 80% of your everyday conversation. Now, do you realize what this means? Well, to me it means that you can speak any language with comparative ease by learning only about 400 words. Because despite the fact that there are more than 450,000 words in Webster's Big Dictionary, over 600,000 in the English language, we use the same few over and over again. The word is the most used, followed by the, and, a, and to. In fact, these 5 tiny words, is, the, and, a, and to, provide 1/6 of a person's spoken vocabulary. And think of this, the first 33 words on the list of most used words constitute more than half of a person's everyday speech. Now, here again you can see how easy it should be to learn to get along in a foreign language, if we know which words to learn and how to hang them together. 33 words represent more than half of our daily conversation. And here's an interesting sidelight of this whole thing. It'll give you an idea as to how we generally react to things and ideas. The word no ranks 87th in the list of the most frequently used words. The word yes ranks 366th. In other words, we use the word no more than 4 times as often as we use the word yes. However, the word good ranks 114th, while bad ranks 309th. And to give you an idea of why so few words make up our daily speech, the word hard ranks 144th on the list, but the word difficult ranks 474th. This means we use the word hard when we mean difficult, and it gives us another indication of how really few words you need to know to get along, at least fairly well, in language. There are other hopeful signs. The word love ranks 264th, and the word hate does not appear on the list. On the other hand, war ranks 3,051st, and peace does not appear on the list. The word God stands at 511th, and the list of the 10 most often used nouns is interesting. We are most likely to talk of a man, a picture, woman, mother, thing, way, hand, girl, kind, or face, in that order, as the 10 most often used nouns. The 10 most frequently used verbs are look, think, know, go, seem, see, say, get, try, and come. It was also discovered who does the most talking, men or women. The study found that women talk more than men and say much less. They say more in words, but they don't put across as many ideas. Now, that's according to the survey. That isn't my opinion. It's interesting, isn't it? Here are 10 questions calculated to determine how happy and well-adjusted you are. They're questions a psychiatrist or psychologist might ask you. See how you do. 1. Are you happy? That is, do you consider yourself to be a generally happy person? Do you tend to look on the bright side of things, or do you tend to be suspicious and fearful? 2. Do you have a zest for living? Do you look forward to your days with interest and anticipation? 3. Are you socially adjusted? That is, do you get along well with other people? Do you have a good circle of friends and enjoy being with other people? Can you look at most things from the other person's point of view as well as your own? The loss of interest in being with other people, a loss of interest generally, is often the first sign of mental illness. 4. Do you have unity and balance? This is to say, do you have many interests? It's unhealthy to wrap your life around any one thing. Every person needs many supports under his table. He finds interest and challenge in his work and does it well, but he also has many other interests. 5. Can you live with each problem as it arises? Of all the things you worried about last year, how many actually happened? Do you recognize problems as a normal, healthy part of living, and look upon them as challenges to be solved and overcome, or do you try to run and hide from them or let them overwhelm you? 6. Do you have insight into your own conduct? Can you see yourself as others see you and understand why you do the things you do? 7. Do you have a confidential relationship with someone? Everyone needs someone with whom he can let down the barriers and talk out his fears and problems completely, with whom he can be completely candid. 8. Do you have a sense of the ridiculous? Can you laugh at yourself? Laughter's been called the sunshine of the soul. Without it, darkness settles in. Never lose your sense of humor. You can't get ulcers when you're laughing. 9. Are you engaged in satisfying work? The well-adjusted person realizes the importance of work, the right kind of work, the kind of work that uses up his energy in a fulfilling and creative way and leaves him tired but satisfied. And 10, do you know how to worry effectively? Do you understand that lurking in every situation that causes you worry or concern, there is an equivalent benefit to be found? Okay, how'd you do in the well-adjusted department? If you found you could answer yes to every question, you're a happy, creative, productive human being. If you answered no to some of the questions, well, at least you know the areas that need strengthening. Epictetus was a Greek philosopher who lived in the 1st century A.D. Very little is known about him except that he was a slave and that he was lame, which, according to one tradition, was due to tortures inflicted upon him by his master. He was ultimately emancipated and became a teacher of philosophy in Rome. When the Roman emperor banished all philosophers from Italy about 90 A.D., Epictetus moved on but continued his teaching. Like so many other great teachers, he left nothing in writing. For the record of his teaching and utterances, we are indebted to his disciple, the Greek philosopher and historian Arrian. Epictetus stressed the importance of cultivating complete independence of external circumstances and learning that if a person is to find happiness, he must find it within himself. Like Emerson, who was to follow centuries later, Epictetus taught the duty of reverencing the voice of reason in the soul. And every time I take him down from my library shelf and start poking around in his sayings, I come away refreshed and invigorated. Take this quotation, for instance. Even as the sun doth not wait for prayers and incantations to rise, but shines forth and is welcomed by all, so thou also wait not for clapping of hands and shouts of praise to do thy duty. Nay, do good of thine own accord, and thou wilt be loved like the sun. And it was Epictetus who first said, Nature hath given men one tongue, but 2 ears, that we may hear from others twice as much as we speak. Here's another I like. Epictetus said, when we are invited to a banquet, we take what is set before us. And were one to call upon his host to set fish upon the table or sweet things, he would be deemed absurd. Yet in a word we ask the gods for what they do not give, and that although they have given us so many things. But let me get back to what may have been confusing, that business about reverencing the voice of reason in the soul. Emerson put this many ways. He wrote, each man has an aptitude born with him. Do your work. I have to say this often, but nature says it oftener. And he also said, self-trust is the first secret of success. The belief that if you are here, the authorities of the universe put you here and for cause. And again, do that which is assigned you, and you cannot hope too much or dare too much. All of this has to do with listening for the voice of reason within each of us, which from time to time clearly outlines the path we should follow. As Emerson also put it, trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. Accept the place the divine providence has found for you. Nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind. At any rate, I enjoyed digging up old Epictetus and our friend Emerson again. I hope you have too. So thou also wait not for clapping of hands, and shouts and praise to do thy duty. Nay, do good of thine own accord, and thou wilt be loved like the sun. Thank you.